Ladies and gentlemen, this indeed has been a pressing challenge for the leaders, and that's exactly what our next speaker will be focused on. The title of his presentation is Leadership in a Post-COVID Era, how people have been responding, and what are the key takeaways from these two very trying years. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the Managing Director of Strategy Focus Group USA and UAE. Please welcome Ron Thomas.
Thank you all for waiting. I think I'm the last speaker, maybe. Second to last. Okay, cool. Thanks for that correction. I was been listening to the speakers all day, and it kind of sinks into what I'm going to talk about because I've heard disruption, I've heard Gen Z, Gen Y, customer experience, purpose-driven, upskilling and reskilling, HR capabilities. What about leadership development? Leadership development for those Gen X's, Gen Y's, Gen Z's, all of the alphabets? Change somewhat? Or it should change if your customer profile is different from the customer perspective. It may cause some adjustment, or it should cause some adjustment. So the slide went ahead. So, is your organization fit for the future? That's going to be what I'm going to be talking about for the next 19 plus minutes. So I'm sure we all have a workout routine, whether it's the gym or walking or whatever it is. And we do that for fitness. We watch what we eat. Well, sometimes we do. But we try and do all these things to live a healthier life. But as a leader, are we still anchored in the old mindset? Or did the leadership capabilities change? COVID, disruption, being locked down for a year. You're talking about the different generations inside of a workforce. What does a leader do to upskill and reskill? What is the leadership routine, and what does that look like? Because that's going to be important in managing this so-called new workforce. The DNA of a workforce has changed drastically. Younger people are coming in. Are we still using the old mindset of the old style leader, directive, my way, highway? I had a client call in Dubai pre-COVID, and the leader spent 10 to 15 minutes telling me how great of a leader he was. Went on and on. But out of the corner of my eye, I'm watching the HR person, who's the Chief Human Resource Officer, and she would not make contact with me. So I knew right away something's going on. So as the meeting was over, he knew everything, he walked out. She walked me to my car, and I asked her, what was all that about? She said, he goes on and on and on about what a great leader he is, but he comes in every morning, does not even do the basics of good morning, how is everyone? And he has to walk through a thicket, the same as the table here, to get to his office. He goes in that office, takes his jacket off, does not come out only for bathroom breaks and meetings. But he swears he's a good leader. So I tell that story for us to think about, what impact are we having on our organizations? Korn Ferry says that the climate that a team produces is all dictated by the leader of that team. 70%. So if you think in terms of teams throughout the organization, do we have the right leaders in place? I had a situation with a call from China early today, and they were struggling with turnover in a certain sector. And as we dug a little deeper, and I went through my questioning process, one of the questions I asked her, I said, tell me about the leader. Because you said it's coming from a certain division, a certain leader. What is the exit interviews telling you? What kind of vibes are you picking up? Came back to the leader. Leader was out of control. But the leader thought they were in control. So as we think through this fitness routine, I want you to think about your team. I want you to think about your team and how well you are developing your people. And what are you doing to upscale? What does your reading material look like? Because the great equalizer was COVID. In a lot of cases, I said COVID was a gift. Because organizations were normal routine, no changes, there was the calmness. We didn't have to worry. Strategy was working. And all of a sudden, it's like a puzzle that you almost have all the pieces, and somebody comes by and says, and we have to start over again. And we were locked down. Business strategy shifted. Business model changed. All of that as a result of the COVID experience. So what scientists are saying, this is just the first generation of these type disruptions as it relates to diseases. So what kind of leader are we going to need going forward? And that's something that we all have to think about. The doctors tell us the physical once a year, and we should abide by that. I had mine a couple of weeks ago. How many of you had a physical this year? Thank you. The rest of you, you're waiting on it, right? You're waiting for the doctor to call and aggravate you to say, come on in and get that physical done. So I'm going to take this back to the context of the leader. Leadership checkup, what does that look like? We're at the top of the food chain. We create the climate. So when you talk about purpose, I'm thinking, what are you doing as a leader to create the purpose? Are you living, eating, and breathing the purpose? Or are you just talk it and you turn around and go do something else, which happens a lot. So the key is that we have to think in terms of not only the Gen X to Gen Ys and how we hire these people, what capabilities we look for. There's a lot of parts of the equation that we're going to have to look inward to ourselves and try and figure out how do we manage this cross-function of people and skill sets. How do we create an organization that people want to be a part of? Because, you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned the great resignation. You said the great recalibration. I've always said that's what it was about because they've been putting up with certain things. They had time during COVID to rethink that equation and said, you know what, I'm going to tighten up my CV and I'm out of here. And this is what organizations are going to have to deal with going forward. We're going to have to think about how do we become better leaders. I want to show you a quick video. You said it would work, right? It's not working. It's okay, because we're short on time. So I tend to always want to name every leadership development I put together as a symphonic C-suite. If you think of every instrument, certain skill set that's needed for that. At certain points in time, certain instruments play a huge role in whatever that selection is. And that could be strategy listed number one. Maybe the horns play a huge role as it relates to that. Maybe there's another one that we play and the drum, one of the trombones or whatever section that is plays a part of that. So how do we put all of that together into one coherent theme and tackle the strategy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it is? How do we do that? We do that with leadership, and we do that with having the leaders in place that understands this disruption and how we're going to manage this disruption going forward. The video that did not show showed an F1 team changing a tire or getting serviced. 11 seconds. If you ever watch that, watch it in terms of having a team that was developed. Every person at that pit stop had a job to do. They understood they were on the clock. 11 seconds. And that car was able to come in there. All of the tires were changed, and they made whatever adjustments, and they were able to pull out. What is your strategy, 1, 2, 3, for leaders? Do you have the efficiency of an F1 team? Are you creating a climate for that F1 team? Are you good at talking the talk? Which is what happens a lot, which is what happened to my friend's CEO. Pretty stylish, right? Pretty stylish. Nice outfits. The men in the hats. Leadership style. Is it still anchored in this era? Industrial age mindset. Are we still managing from that industrial age mindset? Or do we need to kind of spiff it up a little bit and change it around and put on a different outfit? Because we may, just may, be managing from a different time zone. And this is why the checkup is important. I know we have to understand all the topics that I talked about, and I basically sat there and made a list. And then I'm thinking, how am I as a leader going to be able to manage or lead this group of people? Because if all those shifts have taken place, market is changing, strategy is shifting, business model is changing, how do we have crisis leaders, which I'll talk to in just a minute? So from time to time, we've got to kind of sit back and try and figure out how are we going to propel our team to success. So I have a hammer here. I love this quote. If the only tool you have as a leader is a hammer, everything else is a nail. So what does that so-called toolbox, leadership toolbox, look like? That if I go to this instrument, I'm going to maybe use a coaching model. If I go to this instrument, I may be using a more directive model, an affiliative model, and it goes on, depending upon how many tools and the context of the situation that we're dealing with. Toolkit. But if we're using that hammer for every situation, recalibration. Maybe no one feels strong enough to tell you that you're out of control. I always remember a story of my daughter when she was in 8th grade. I was in my office working, and she was walking downstairs, and I always had this ability to listen to the way she was walking to get a sense of what she was dealing with a lot, and she wanted to talk about something. And she came down, she sat down, I'm working, I look, and she begins to tell me what she's dealing with. And being a multitasker, I'd step back and I was doing my work. Then I stopped listening, I'm doing my work. And then she paused. And then I turned around in directive mode. I said, okay, here's what you got to do. You're going to do 1, you're going to do 2. She said, stop it. She said, stop it. She said, you get into a mindset sometime that you always want to solve things, but you never listen. So one of the speakers talked about a listening strategy. What does a listening strategy look like? What does a communication strategy look like? Post-COVID, we're going to need both of those. And what she was telling me, just listen sometimes and stop it. Here was an 8th grade person, and I'm considering myself as a global leader and all those kind of phrases, and I was totally clueless. But I learned from that. I learned from that whatever we're perceiving may not be the context of people perceiving from us. And this is why understanding our styling and all those kinds of things. So here's what Con Ferry says, 6 styles. Directive, I'm giving the directions. Coaching, long-term professional development of employees. Every piece of research around leadership development says the coaching model is more impactful than some of the others. Not going to go through all of these, but what style or what tools do you have in your toolkit? Please don't let it be that hammer. Now, leadership blind spot. Mine was a blind spot. I figured I knew what I was doing, and I figured I could answer questions and all these kinds of things and do it. But what I did with that, I went back to my team at work. I pulled everybody in the conference room. I told them that story. I said, am I really like that? And they kind of looked around and they wanted to affirm that. And eventually someone said, yeah, well, sometimes. So what do you mean by sometimes? You do that a lot. So part of my growth was to consistently ask people, how am I doing? So this says here, the top 10 blind spots. This is for the other group in the other rooms. This is not for us because I know all of you got it going on, okay? So these shortcomings here are for the people in the other rooms and having the other conferences. This is not for us because we got it all going on, okay? So you can let them know that we were talking about them. They want to go it alone. They're afraid to ask the questions. They're not taking a stand or commitment to a position. It goes on and on. If you were to Google's top 10 blind spots, this is what you're going to get. A variation of this. But we all suffer from this. And the only way we're going to figure out how do we get better at what we do is to ask people and get feedback. We ask people and get feedback. That way we can consistently kind of maneuver and build ourselves into what we've already considered was a great leader. So here's a concept, and this came from PwC. And I was really intrigued by this concept. So what they were talking about was the Qs. IQ, 1912, measure of intelligence. So we've all heard that. And then it talked through EQ, perception. Antenna is always up. And then the concept came to CQ. And that really piqued my imagination. I said, what is CQ? And what they were saying in the article about CQ was the crisis quotient. Crisis quotient. COVID. Reacting to COVID. Workforce. All virtual. I'm used to being in the room. Now it's virtual. Business model change. Strategy shifted. All of these came about as a result. So what they're saying was, what is the crisis quotient of your leaders? Because it could be, and what one leader told me, that I have a couple leaders, they were stuck in concrete. They were afraid to make decisions because they didn't have all of the details that they would normally have. But the climate is different. And you may not be able to wait around for that. So think of this. Think of what your crisis quotient would be. How well did you deal with the past 2 years? What did you learn from that is the most important piece. What did you learn from that? Because if you just came out of that and we're coming back and you're still using the same routine, you are absolutely, positively clueless, 72 size font. Crisis quotient. The ability to focus on what matters most and make decisions in the face of uncertainty. You may not ever have all the answers. So how can we collaborate with the team members? Am I using a directive style? I'm collaborating with the team members and we're coming up with a solution. There may not ever come a time where we have all the ducks in a row, or whatever that euphemism is as it relates to that. It includes the ability to simplify complexity, prioritize, and make decisions when you don't have all the facts. How well did you operate from the COVID experience? Willingness to admit that we're not perfect and that we have to adapt and learn because the situation around me has changed and I have to react to that. So how do we get better at this? How do we get started? So if you look at these, this is a discussion, a collaborative discussion with your team. So we do great on strategy. We do great inside of these meetings. Let's take a meeting with our team and talk about what is the biggest challenge we had over the past 2 years? How did we handle them? Who struggled? All of these kinds of things. Because we have to build a new model, and we're coming back to normal, so why not get our leadership capabilities back in order, or do we still wear the same styles of the slide that was up a few minutes ago? Some leaders thrive in organizations more than others. I mentioned Volvo here because Volvo has a very famous case study as to how they got back on track. They were at a point of almost going out of business. Owned by Ford Motor Company, but Ford owned Volvo, Jaguar, and Range Rover. Jaguar and Range Rover people bought. Nobody wanted Volvo. So when Volvo took over, what they decided to do was look at a new leadership profile. And one of the statements from the CEO said, we will only hire leaders who have conceived or managed major strategic shifts in larger organizations. In other words, we have uncertainty here. Our business strategy shifted from an also heavily produced auto manufacturer to now we want to compete with the BMWs and the Mercedes of the world, which means we have to do a different product. And all that comes back to take your leadership team to the gym, metaphor, and get them equipped for the future because you're going to need it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.